Namaskar and welcome to the Saraswati Sangam project panel discussion series. Today's panel discussion is on role of temples.
Namaskar or Jai Shri Ram. This is a phenomenal, momentous occasion how we started 2024 with the rebuild of our Ayodhya Ram Mandir after, of course, centuries of struggle and eventual resolution of the need for a temple rebuilt in the place that is believed to be the birthplace of Lord Ram. So obviously, this triggered this group and me especially in thinking that we need to have a discussion around role of temples, and of course, this hopefully has initiated a brand new era of revival of temples. And obviously, in that context, we would want to ask, what is the role of temples? What we do know very factually and empirically is northern part of India has very few ancient temples, if any. And we also know that very holy places like the Somnath temple was destroyed 17 plus times and rebuilt as many times, and it absolutely exists today and a beautiful place to visit. So that begs the question in terms of what was temple ecosystem about, what was the purpose and function of temples back when we did have great temples. And of course, now if we are looking to build temples and hopefully then create everything positive that comes with that, that's a question the community and the entire country and the world over Hindu population should be thinking about. So that's where I want to start conversation today, and with very simple questions, set the stage for future discussions, probably in a more deeper dive mode. So let me start with the first question of when we today go to temples, what do we look for? As in, what are temples serving as our purpose today as we visit temples? So Yogesh, I'm gonna start with you with your feeling or approach to your engagement with temples.
I think the modern day relationship of individuals and groups with the temple and temple systems is more uh, related to the rituals and, just to keep it in terms of visiting your aradhya or whatever and then come back. Uh, but that's really the modern situation. Historically, what I perceive the temples were meant to be, and Prahlad, you have mentioned few points, it's a combination of things. It's not only learning centers like some universities, or it's not only economic. It does take care of economic side as well. Uh, some of those which were made lavishly, amount of labor deployed in making temple in for 20 years period or 15 years in itself is a major construction job. And then the ongoing upkeep and everything, and the other ecosystem which would have been created about it. I was watching a series recently. Uh, I'm not sure, Raja Rasoi and Anya Kahaniya. And in one of the episodes, it said the temples were also, and it was, I think it's the episode on Karnataka, probably or Mysore, where it said the temples were meant to be, the center and the hub of social activities, including uh, what is called an equivalent of a langar. That every day temple will prepare the food you know for the poor people to eat, and the state was supporting that. And there was another story, so I will not go into the story, how the state and the temple administration worked together to make this economic activity self-sustainable with a one-time seed capital which the state provided. And the local community made use of that seed capital to do commercial activity and channel back the profits, part of the profits into the temple for this ongoing activity. It was an absolutely seamless, perfect economic model. The third part, which I look at the temples, and I have been saying this in my personal private conversations a lot, I think they were the place to preserve the ecological system of the locality. If you notice, temples mostly are built on around water bodies or a forest, a little outside of the main city or main village or main area. And you are told you can't, pollute the water. You need to worship this tree and that tree. And imagine thousands of years back when the level of education, the general awareness about all of this was lacking, what is the best way to communicate? Make things in a way which becomes part of the daily routine and rituals for everybody. So you come to temple, you take your, whatever, and you do not make the water go bad, and do not cut trees around the temple, etc. So it was serving multi-purpose job temples as the center of activities for the neighborhoods nearby people. So that's my take.
Thank you. So Ravindraji, from your perspective, what do you think temples are serving a role of these days? And of course, your own personal, perhaps, way by which you visit temples and experience temples.
Sure, Parnaji. So as I was again in my previous conversation saying, so temple have played a very critical role. See, the Hindu Dharma, Sanatana Dharma is all about seeking. And temple is the way for your Gyan Yoga for seeking. So we have to, temple, I basically correlate temple very equivalent to the universities. It's like a temple of knowledge, temple of worship. So a lot of so temple is going to play a very key role in knowledge, in getting the Hindu Dharma much more revived, and making prosperity in the community, bringing a peace and harmony in the world. So at the center, it's a very critical role in terms of not just the basic ritual, where people takes time to understand what is the meaning of ritual and how do they correlate to it, but just um, all our religious activity, dharmic activity, spiritual activity, and economical activity, and then community activity revolving around center temple, that itself is uh, it's going to basically play a very pivotal role in reshaping the community and then the world in general. So it's a, and then we also, that's also we need to basically, to the common people, we need to bring the value and power and the meaning of these institutions. We have to treat the temple as a big institution, and then we need to making sure the way the people who are involved, let's say priests and all, that are given the right value, given the right position, the kind of respect we used to have, the Gurukul. If you look at our Gurukul, there's a lot of common point between Gurukul universities and temple. So just correlate to that. Next to the temple, you will have a big Gurukul, and then so many things are going on there. It's all about learning, teaching, and then bringing peace, harmony, surrounded with so many economical activities. So that's what I'm looking forward to our temple-based driven economy and peace and knowledge centers in the future.
Right. So obviously, both Yogesh and Ravindraji, you've talked about what, or at least hinted upon what temples were in the past. But clearly, as we see temples today, they are not doing what things you've talked about. Of course, they are creating an ecosystem, an economy around themselves. But being able to be carrier and bearer of knowledge, an actual deep understanding exactly of the flavor that Raviteja ji spoke about today, that is dearly missing. So, historically speaking, we need to understand what temples and how temples were serving a knowledge source and knowledge bearer role in the past. So, Rudraji, from your understanding and knowledge of the past, what did you see or know or learn about temples functioning in the past when they did exist hundreds of thousands of years ago in the form they did exist then?
Well, clearly, Yogesh ji and Ravindra ji have enunciated what was the role in the past. If you listen to Ankit Shah's podcast nowadays, and many of you probably have in various channels on YouTube. He is actively been talking about reinstituting the temple ecostructure, where it was a hub of economy as well as learning. And there's certainly a lot of merit to that. Certainly, if you see even the churches in the US, how they have transformed themselves into becoming not just places of prayer and worship, but places of community gathering. And that is where things are going, regardless of which sampradaya you belong to. And certainly, when I was actively involved in the Durga Badi in Houston, we certainly attempted to make sure that there was teaching, there was children are not necessarily going to be attracted to puja and paddhati. They are going to be attracted to krida and competition, and that is what temples used to be, and that is what they should become. There's two reasons for what they have become now, two main reasons. One is certainly the pressure from inimical governments, and without going into detail and the gory details at that, but governments have been inimical towards temples for a very, very long time in India and in most lands where there are predominance of Hindus, whether it's Indonesia or Cambodia or Laos, wherever, it doesn't matter. It's the same. Now, at least we have a government that is, while not supportive, is not inimical. And then the second thing that caused this to happen was the Bhakti movement, which was also a reaction to certain events. The Bhakti movement made the temple the center of Bhakti alone, and then the rest of the functions of the temple got somewhat left by the wayside. So now that we have this young kid, Mr. Teja, talking about Mimamsa, it is a welcome return to the various darshanas that we used to have and were actively discussed at all times. It all became Vedantic and all became Bhakti, and now we are returning a little bit to our roots, and that's a welcome sign.
Very right, very rightly said. Rahulji, from your perspective, and you have many temples in your neighborhood, extend maybe to 20, 30 miles. What have you seen, and what do you think these temples or other temples in India could have a role, and how can we transition to that in looking at the future of temples and future roles of temples?
Right. So as I reflect upon this, it's for me, it's a place of inspiration. It's a sort of what is being called a third space. So you have your home and your workspace, and then there's a third space where you can go and spend time and engage with the community. And I think that's the role that would be very useful as a place of inspiration. Just looking at the physical structures, they have become sort of the cutting edge of what was the best in architecture or the best in art at the time that they were built. And thankfully, we are seeing that return. If you look at the new structures that are being made, you're seeing a return of that. If you look at the Akshardham Temple in New Jersey, and having visited it, it's pretty impressive. So I like that. For me personally, as I think about these places as being a place of inspiration, a place where you can go and be at peace with yourself. And in my personal life, most of my spiritual or religious activities are in my head. So I like to be in a place that leaves me alone to reflect and to do that. And unfortunately, most temples today don't do that. They've either become tourist places overrun by people who just come to look at the physical structure without any further sort of deep reflection on what's going on there, or they're so full of rituals that we were sharing last weekend that there's this beautiful temple in North Jersey that I love to spend time in, but they were so insistent on specific rituals that they want to follow that I stopped going there. So that's sort of where I think if there's a mature way of looking at where these temples are going as centers of the community, really safeguarding the best of culture and art, and encouraging reflection and discussion on topics such as the one we are having today. I think that's the role that would be very useful for them to hold.
Excellent. So Rahulji, I don't intend to put you on the spot, but you had narrated a very nice story last time we chatted. And I really want that story to be shared here and really reused over and over, because to me, the future of temples and our Hindu ecosystem is really to remind ourselves the real meaning behind everything we do. And that's again in the line of temples being rebuilt and re-energized is very important to, when you get a clean start, so to speak, you have an opportunity to go the right way, whatever that right may be, which you have to define. So may I request you to share that story, and then hopefully we'll remember the story in future references.
Sure. It's something I refer to as the goat story. And it is one of the few things I remember from business school. It was from an organization behavior class. And the story was told. I've used it in a work setting many times. And it goes like this. There's this family. This is a story from ancient India. There's a family that lives in a rural environment. It's an agricultural area, so they are farmers, and they have a specific ritual puja that they do every year. So it's a harvest festival. As I heard the description, it seemed to me like the Dashera celebrations that we used to have in North India. But they take the fresh produce from the harvest, they arrange it in the angan, they clean up the angan, and then they sit around and do the ritual. So one year they do all the preparations, they lay everything out, and as they are getting ready to sit down, there's a goat running around. The goat comes and eats the produce and dirties the whole place. So they have to start all over again, clean the whole angan, do the whole thing again. Next year, same thing happens. I mean, it's a farming environment. There are goats running around. So it happens a couple of years running, and then the patriarch of the family basically says, okay, new rule, you first tie the goat in the corner before you clean the angan and do all the preparations. So that becomes the rule. They tie the goat in the corner, and they don't have any such disruptions going forward. So now many generations have passed. The family is no longer a farming family. They live in a city, in a high-rise building, and they still do the puja. And now the first step of the puja is to go rent a goat, bring it into their home, tie it in the corner, and then do the ritual. And that to me sort of feels like, I don't want to cast aspersions on any rituals that are being done today, but it feels like some of them might not be relevant anymore. And that's something to sort of keep in mind as we move forward.
Wonderful. That just clicked very well for me, because again it gives this visual draw of something that we should actually be paying attention to in everything we do. And now in this discussion of role of temples, that's the opportunity of asking, what do we have, why do we do, what do we make of it, and how do we proceed forward for creating a robust life and robust future. So to me, temples really are the central nervous system of the human society. And of course, now you can define what the central nervous system does. And obviously, if that's what we anticipate is needed for ensuring human society with Hindu frame is robust and flourishing for thousands of years to come, that's the opportunity. And that's why your goat story is very, very to point in saying That's what we need to keep in mind as we proceed forward. So, Anilji, what we are discussing now is pretty much defining what we would want our temples, and as we hopefully revive more temple and create a stronger temple ecosystem around in India and beyond, all over the world, what should we be aspiring for?
I agree with you. It's a very, very important topic. And to me, my perspective is this, that the equivalent of temples, which is the churches and the mosques and the gurudwaras and so on, synagogues, play a very, very, very critical role in other religions. And we know what the potential is. However, I think as we get into the discussion, one important thing to keep in mind is the difference between Hinduism and the others, and something that I think we need to factor in as we come up with this. And that is that, unlike these other religions which require people to attend once a week on a particular day, and it's something that can be enforced and so on and so forth through pressure, various kinds of public pressure. We don't have that in Hinduism. So one other thing that we have to keep in mind is how do we convince or motivate Hindus to go to temples more often. So temples can play a role, and that's, I think, part of what should go into deciding what is the role that temples should play. And keeping in mind that unlike the other religions, we don't have a mandate for people to visit. And so how do we get them in? Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Anilji. I'm going to request Shrikantji to wrap up today's session with obviously a note that we will come back to this topic for specific deeper dives in future, noting the importance of the topic. So Shrikantji, if you would please wrap up today's discussion, and we'll close with that.
Sure. Thank you, Aparnaji. So I would just like to make a couple of observations on the how I see what the role for temples in the future should be. And I'd like to address this question from two perspectives, from the India perspective and from the US perspective. I think from the India perspective, I think the first thing needs to happen is the temples need to be, freed from government ownership. And that is besides the point. But I think temples need to see themselves as economic engines. Now, as per the latest national survey statistics, the contribution of temples to India's economic GDP is 2.32%. And I think there's a potential for that to be much, much higher. And until the time the temples are freed from government ownership, I think it's incumbent upon the government to do it. But I think government needs to look at developing these temples not just as places of worship, but also as cultural centers, right? And then temples also need to start being repositories of cultural information. And I think other speakers have dwelled on it. But I think it's important for temples to take this knowledge to the people. And how do they do that? I think the temples need to start going digital. I think the big temples have websites, but it's important for all the smaller temples to also start having websites, have information on things like what is the significance of the temple architecture of that time. I think this is the cultural information that the temples needs to propagate to people and other such similar information. So temples need to start being futuristic. On the temples in the US part, I think, and I feel very strongly about this, temples need to start being the voice of Hinduism. That's a role that they are not expected to play in India because thankfully, at least until now, India is a Hindu majority country. But in overseas and in the US, temples need to start being the voice of Hinduism. At least they need to start providing a platform for the voice of Hinduism to emerge. In the last several years in the US, we have seen so many attacks on Hindu festivals, Hindu beliefs, Hindu rituals from the left. And the temples in the US are very hesitant, leave alone, to push back against this narrative, to even provide a platform for people to counter this narrative. I think it's very important for the temples in the US to start being the voice of Hinduism. I think that's a very important role they need to start playing. On that, I think I have said all what I wanted to say.
All right, thank you. So central nervous system is voice and many other things. So obviously we need to dive deeper in future, as I mentioned several times today, in asking what we need to create as the knowledge and discussion frame for at least making this group and hopefully a broader group aware of what to consider for the future of temples. Any closing remarks and obviously any comments from our mentees?
If I can sort of take 2 minutes, I'm sorry I wasn't part of that discussion, so maybe it has been discussed already. But as I said, that I see that from the examples of churches and mosques and gurdwaras and synagogues that it can play a tremendous role. And the question to ask is, why do Christians and Muslims and Sikhs and so on go to the gurdwaras and so on and so forth? And I said that one is, of course, that they are required to go, but also the second aspect is that that each of these the churches and so on and so forth play an important role in fulfilling the needs of the people around them. Whether it's to help them with jobs or help them, then somebody needs a ride or education for kids, so they basically try at least to fulfill almost every possible need that their congregants might have. And I think that's what we will need to do in Hindu temples as well, if we want to get people to go to temples more often, which is that, what do Hindus need from day to day, and can temples play a role in helping achieve those goals? So it could be, putting people together to help each other, or it's kind of a self-help group, if you will. That's the way I see all of these things prospering the churches and the mosques. Thank you.
Sri Ranjini, Ankita, love to hear your thoughts. What do you do when you go to temples, or what have you experienced temples as?
I would like to add a small note over there. In Sanskrit, the definition of kshetram is kshayat trayate, which means prevents degradation. So it prevents the degradation of the society. It improves social as well as individual family relationships, which will be the better unification of the nation, society, as well as the family relations in a better way.
That was very beautifully put, Sri Ranjini. Very, very nice. Thank you for adding your thoughts. Anything more? All right, I think we'll wrap up with that. Thank you very much for joining today. As I said, the role of temples is a very important topic. We have all weighed in on what the past, present, and future of temples was and can be. And of course, we would want to have further conversations towards what we can contribute in the future of temples and in all of our lives, what roles we can contribute towards creating a better and more rewarding future for ourselves through temples. So namaskar and thank you very much.
We greatly appreciate your support. Thank you.